First of all, an artist, a traveller, a sailor, and a bit of everything else besides. Can we have Helen Wheatley, please? There we are. Hi, Helen. I've never seen you in my life before.
No, this is an experience for me.
Oh, well. You were born a bit south of Keighley, I gather.
Yes, I'm an off Cumberland, aren't I? Yes, Tasmania. Can you get any further south than that? I don't know.
No, it's about far away as you can possibly get. So, you went to school in Tasmania?
I went to school in Tasmania, yes, to the same school all my life, which was a great joy.
Right.
And at school I developed a love of sailing. And this was really, apart from reading Swallows and Amazons when I was about 7, we had a grand old man of the sea called Helen Wheatley who came to school and talked about his life on the wheat clippers. And he talked about sailing down into the 40s latitudes, down into the 50s, down into the 60s where the icebergs float around the world and round the Horn. And I thought, that's what I want to do. And so for the first 15 years of my life, I was trying to find a way of sailing. And in the end, I found a young man who was willing to take me sailing in a dinghy. And so I was able to then develop and explore a love of the sea, which I've had ever since and keep on going. I sailed in dinghies for years and years, first of all pretending to be a boy because the girls weren't allowed to race, so I had to have very short hair and a hood on, and rather like going into the pubs as women couldn't do in Australia at the same sort of time. One had to pretend to be a man, which was quite fun.
So this is all during school days?
This was all during school days, yes. This is before I left school, yes.
And then when you left school, what happened?
When I left school, I became an art teacher, and that was fine. I did art teacher training and fine arts training, and so I became a fine artist as well, which one did in those days. But I was sent teaching to a small country town a long way away, which was fine, except that I fell in love. And so I left my job and flew back to Hobart, not literally flew because there were no aeroplanes, but my feet flew me back to live with this young man with whom I'd fallen in love, which was quite shocking. People didn't live with somebody in those days, so the family didn't want to know. But he introduced me to the world of television because I didn't have a job, and he was a television cameraman and then later a floor manager, and got me the first design assistant's job in television. So this was a job I had to make up as I went along, working for a designer, doing all the technical drawings, choosing the props, setting up the studio, so kind of working backstage. And that was fine, I learned the trade. But there I met a very wonderful television director called Pat Alexander, who was also a theatre director. And he was putting on a play at the local rep theatre, and he needed a stage manager. He already had a designer, so I went and learned to be a stage manager. And I had to learn that from the bottom up as well, and make it up as I went along. But I enjoyed that enormously and found that theatre was a great joy and a great delight. And so I then ended up working as a stage manager and a set designer in the theatre in the evenings, and a set designer in telly in the daytime.
That must have taken a bit of energy at that time. So what happens? This was Tasmania's own television channel?
Yes, they just started having television in 1950.
So what sort of programmes do you do?
Oh, well, they had a rule that you had to do lots of local content. But we had concerts in the studio, so television concerts. We had science programmes, we had local talks, we had cooking programmes and children's programmes. And because being the woman, I got the children's program. So one of the things I had to do was to design the Australian equivalent of Play School. When Play School first came onto television in England, Australia wanted to have it too. So we designed not an identical set, but a sort of complementary set, so we could have some Australian programs and some English ones. So I had to design the sets for that, which was about the thing I was best known for, I think, in Australia, although it wasn't in the terms of the job terribly important. But right. I remember Play School, yes.
So from Tasmania, you shifted?
Well, yeah. I shifted first to Melbourne and tried to sail a sailing boat we'd built to Melbourne, but we were more or less shipwrecked and decided we weren't going to do it. So I then came to England to work at the BBC.
You just decided to build a ship?
Well, the man with whom I fell in love and I conceived this mad idea and spent 3 years building an ocean-going yacht. Which was 3 years of my life. And again, it's another one of those skills that relates. You learn how to be terribly practical. I was the kind of labourer. I did the sandpapering and the painting and that kind of thing. But I also designed the interior of this sailing boat. And as I said, we were going to sail around the world, but we decided it was not. Well, I decided it wasn't terribly safe. This chap with whom I was in love didn't know as much about sailing as I did, and I didn't think that I knew enough to sail around the world. So I think it was probably a very good idea to stop the idea. But another dream, you know, you lose a dream, and it's always rather sad when you lose a dream.
So did you sail in her at all then?
Oh yes, we sailed around. We sailed around the coast. We sailed around and got into some pickles and got out of some pickles and had some absolutely wonderful times. Beautiful blue and golden days when you're sailing with the wind behind you and you're sitting on the deck with a glass of beer and days to remember. But I came to England then by ordinary passenger ship. Rather a letdown as a punter.
So then over to England?
Yes.
What to do then?
Well, the ambition of all young Australian television people was to work at the BBC. So I went along with nothing except my drawings. There was no reference letters or anything like that. I went along with my drawings to the BBC and they said, when can you start? So I started. And I actually worked in the BBC as a set designer. But I started off as a design assistant. And that was really much more fun because I worked on quite good classic serials, that kind of thing. Dad's Army, which is the thing everybody remembers me for, which I did when I wasn't working on the shows that were considered more important. Met the good and the great, and the most prestigious program I ever worked on was a program made to as a sort of play of James Elroy Flacker's Hassan. And in that was Sir John Gielgud and Ralph Richardson, and so I met them and talked to them, and it was a great delight meeting such grand old sirs of the theatre.
So what's the process? What do you actually do in set design? I mean, Dad's Army, say, we all know that, but...
Mm-hmm. Well, you start off reading a script and talking to the director and deciding what scenes you need to build and what is already in stock. For example, we had the church hall drawings for Dad's Army as stock, and so it would just be a matter of saying that's kept in the scenery dock. We'll get that out, but we have to build a train interior. So you go and hire half trains, and they go in a rocker so that it looks as though the person's going along in the train. We had to build a church roof once because Jones climbs out on the flagpole. And that was a church roof that was only about 4 feet high, built on the studio floor. We had to build a lighthouse, and that was another one that I did. We had to all sorts of things like that.
So these all got to be drawn out, yes, and that was your job to...
Yes, to draw out every little detail so that they could be built by the carpenters in the workshop. And then at a later stage, when it's being built, you're choosing the appropriate props. And if you're working on something that is historically important, you have to get everything right. You have to get the knives and forks right. You have to get the flowers in the vases right. You have to get the wallpaper right. You have to, every detail is right. There was a lovely story that was a true one, that a man who installed central heating radiators once wrote to the BBC and said, I noticed that when you put central heating radiators in your sets, they're never connected to the floor. And an edict went round from the boss to say, from now on, run the pipes exactly into the floor, so that the pipes stopped at the floor, but they always looked as though they were connected. We took it as seriously as that. It had to be absolutely spot on. And that's stayed with me ever since. The historical accuracy of something seems to me to be terribly important. It gives it a truth. Even if you don't see the thing, even if it's just a menu on a cafe table and you only see the back of it, somehow working with actors who are sensitive to this sort of idea, and actors are, to have the right feel about it also will give the actors confidence. So it's more important than just the look of it. It's to do with the whole ethos of putting on a play.
How long were you at the BBC for then?
Oh, goodness me. I ought to have looked this up, shouldn't I? It wasn't all that long. It was about 7 or 8 years, I think, but it seemed like a lifetime.
And what happened?
I married. The man I fell in love with, I'd married and divorced. I keep on falling in love. I married somebody else, and his job took him to Nigeria. And in those days, a wife went with the husband. Stupid fool, wasn't I? I gave away this wonderful job and went off to Nigeria as a wife and mother and had children and, you know.
How was Nigeria then?
Oh, God, a dreadful place. It really was awful. It was just horrible. There was nothing nice about it except for the people, the friends we made. The climate was horrid. It was an awkward and scary place to live in, a dangerous place to live in, with highway robbers. It was just like Dick Turpin, people waiting around the corner. You had to be very careful, with guards around the front of your house. But we made friends, and I think one of the things I learned about that was that in adversity, you make friends and you rely on them and they're your friends forever. And I still keep in touch with those people who were my friends in Nigeria. That was an important thing to learn. So yes, it was a terrible time, but it was also a good time for learning and a good time for friendship.
So what happened then?
After that, we went back to Australia to try living there, and that, for various company reasons, nothing to do with me, but the company my husband was working for moved location to other parts of Australia, and so which we didn't really like. And so we came as a family with 2 small children at that stage back to England. And so here was I with no job, 2 small kids and a house to do up. So for a couple of years I spent the whole time doing up a house. And then I looked for a job that could fit in with my children's schooling, which meant that I couldn't really work for telly because they need you to work for all day. You can't say, I'm sorry, I've got to go and pick up the children from school. So I started training as a Montessori teacher and trained as a Montessori teacher and then as a Montessori teacher trainer. And that's what brought me to Wharfdale. I took a job for a year to head up a Montessori primary school in Wharfdale. And I thought, oh, I'll stay for a year. And another year and another year. And in the end, I thought, look, this is just too good to be true. I'm going to live here. So here is where I
here you
retired.
are.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. Mm.
But we've left all the sailing behind. How did you get on the boat?
Well, of course, when the children were small, I didn't do anything except look after the children, and I taught them to sail when they were small. But I'd already retired, and 2 of my children had been sailing on traditional sailing ships with the Tall Ships Youth Trust. They sailed on the schooners, the Winston Churchill and the Malcolm Miller, and I thought this sounded lovely. But I couldn't afford for them to go and for me to go, so they went. But as a result of this, they got together and they booked me on a trip on Endeavour, which is Captain Cook's replica ship, which had by this time sailed out from Australia and was in English waters. And they booked me on for 3 nights, and I was hooked. like Mr. Toad in Wind in the Willows. It's the only way to travel. It was just wonderful. And so from 60 to now, when I'm 70, I was 70 about 2 weeks ago, I've been doing that. I've been sailing on square riggers, on traditional sailing boats, as a deckhand, as a museum curator, as captain steward. Now I'm too old to do any of this exotic stuff like climbing the rigging and stuff. I now work as a ship's cook, and I shall do that as long as I can pull my weight. I'll do that.
But you've done your share of getting up the rigging and things like that.
Yes, I love that. Yeah, I still do it for fun. It's just as you get older, you're not so reliable, I think, in an emergency. But nothing really dangerous. I think it's one of the things about sailing on ships like that now is that they are very, very, very careful about safety. So you're always clipped on with a harness. You'd be very unlucky to have anything go wrong. It's not unless you're foolish. And when you're as old as me, you're not foolish. You take care. You are safe.
But you're going to keep sailing on.
I'm going to keep sailing, and I'm going to keep on working in theatre, because the other thing that happened up here was I could actually start working in theatre again. I was up here working at school and painting as a watercolourist, which is what I do for a day job. And a chap I had met through sailing on the Endeavour called Jeff Kerr, who lives in the village, wrote me in to help with the panto because I didn't have a stage manager. So I worked for the pantomime, and I stage managed for them, and I set design for them, and I did 3 pantomimes, which were all great fun. But during this time, a new theatre company was forming in the village called Penny Plain Theatre,
yep.
And I was asked to join them as part of the sort of founding company. So I've been working for them as well during the summer and then during the winter season ever since. So that's another.
Yeah, and I might add that we don't get a chance to get one button out of place, do we? No, it's
look at your shoes, I say.
No, your knowledge of things Victorian are just is encyclopedic.
Yes,
it's quite a thing.
You can't say shut up in Victorian times. You have to say. Yeah, I know. Yes.
No, how to stand, what to say.
Yes.
Thank you very much indeed, Helen.